Woohoo!
Roger. There's troubleshooting as soon as I get
Did you box moving target?
602.
No, I took an auto track.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Wow, look at the fly!
So I've known about these US Navy UFO videos for quite some time, but I thought I'd do a simulation of this GOFAST one, which I think has been debunked already quite a few times. But a lot of the ways that people have demonstrated all the calculations, it's not complicated maths, but at the same time, it's not always that intuitive to everyone. So I think having it in a simulated view, I thought that'd be quite a cool thing to do. Also, it helps work out potentially a couple of other outstanding things about this video. So with that said, let's start with the original video and let's have a look at the panel and all the different numbers that are being displayed here. So I'll start with the top left and I'll work my way around to what all these measurements and metrics and stuff is saying on the display. The first one here, NAR, that means that the camera's in a narrow field mode. So it's at a field of view of 1. I actually think it's narrower than 1 degree. I explain it a bit more in my blog write-up, but essentially when you build this model and you look at the flow of the water behind it, kind of becomes apparent that you need a narrower field of view to get that kind of motion. But we'll keep that aside for the moment. Then on the next one we've got here, this is indicating that the camera is in IR mode, so it's not you're not seeing kind of visible light here. It's an infrared image. And then the thing that's underneath it is saying that it's 47 degrees left of the heading of the aircraft. The next one that we've got here, 4.2, that's showing the range to the target that it's locked on. And then the metric underneath it, 200 VC, that's kind of the relative speed between the aircraft and the object that's locked on. Lower down on the right, we have the altitude in feet. And then there's a bunch of metrics in the bottom left related to the speed of the aircraft as well. And then this last one here is it's basically just showing that the camera is looking 27 degrees below the horizon. So I showed you the side-to-side comparison of the simulation next to the real footage. And it's pretty close. It's not quite perfect. I wasn't trying to be perfect. If I wanted to refine it, I probably could. But it wouldn't really change much in the way of how fast this object's moving, where it's heading, that kind of thing. So it's good enough for what it is. So how did I start with this simulation? Well, the first thing I created was just a new scene in Unity, and then we've got some sky, and then we've got the sea. Probably too much of it, probably overkill for this demonstration, but there you go. And then the next thing we have is one tic-tac, which I'll zoom in on. And then we've got the overlay for the camera as well, which shows all of the same kind of metrics that you get on the video, really. All the important ones anyway. The portion of the video that I was interested in was from the point that the camera has the target locked to the end of the video. That's a good 20-21 second period. And the reason why I chose that is because it in terms of recreating the scene, it makes life a lot easier because there's a couple of things you know well here. One is the axes of the camera in relation to the aircraft and the fact that the target is always in the middle. So if you make the assumption that this object is staying horizontal, which it is pretty much when you look at it, then you can basically track out the path that this object will take. One thing that throws a little bit of a spanner in the works is the fact that the aircraft is in a left banking maneuver. Real subtle though. When you look at it, it's not actually that significant, because if you look at the movement of the ocean underneath throughout the whole time that the video is locked, it pretty much the whole time just moves uniformly from the bottom left to the top right. There's no change in that direction. And so what you can garner from that is that whatever direction this aircraft's moving, it's doing it in a straight line. There's not that much curvature. In my model, I do actually put a bit of a curve towards the end. I don't think it's necessarily necessary though, but we can play around with it and see what we get. The next thing I did was attach a camera and put it at 1 degree field of view. And you can see on this, what I've got on my screen here, that is such a narrow focus at such a far range that this aircraft is looking at. There's no way they'd be able to visually see what they're tracking. It's quite impressive actually. It's miles away. So the other thing is we know the speed of the aircraft throughout the video, and we know how long the video runs. So we've got speed and time. We can work out how far this plane travels. And then all I did was map out the aircraft's flight. One other thing I did which just made things easier getting the UFO's endpoint is a technique called raycasting. And all that means is I put a plane, like a flat sheet, just like the water here, at a level that was at the altitude that Tic Tac is at. And we can work out the altitude of the UFO roughly just by looking at the range really at the beginning of the video. So you can see it was at 4.4 nautical miles. So that combined with knowing the Hornet's altitude and the angle of the camera, you can make out how high up this thing is. In fact, it's about halfway between the Hornet and the ocean. And so the next thing I did was I moved the Hornet through its flight path. And then at the start, at the end, I shot I guess you could say a laser at that plane, and those points, those red marks, basically define the start and end point of the Tic Tac, because that's where the camera was pointing at the start and at the end. So that's it, quite straightforward from here, guys. Basically all I have to do is put both of these objects at the beginning of their flight path at the start of the video, and just move them towards their waypoint at the end. And then obviously the other thing that we do is interpolate between the two camera angles between the start and end also. And then finally what I did was, so obviously I showed you the panel display at the beginning. I put all those calculations in on what's going on, and that's quite good because when we play the scene, we should, in theory, get something very similar to what we see in the video. It won't be perfect, but it should be close enough. And I'm sure most of you will agree that this isn't too far off. The other thing that's quite apparent now here is the parallax effect, which is when you're observing something and it looks like it's moving when really it's the fact that you're moving in relation to that object. And because of the distances between you and the object and what's behind it, you get this effect of it looking like, that it's moving in a direction when it's not. The other overlay that I've added to this video is the heading of the UFO as well. So that red line shows where that object was traveling. So it was going from left to right. So it probably looks a bit confusing. So it's going in the opposite way in which the parallax effect would have you think. So what that means is if this object wasn't moving at all, it would have looked like it's traveling even faster, because the camera would have had to track back quicker to keep up with it and keep the lock on. On the overlay here, you can see I've got this object moving at around 120 knots. So yeah, you could give or take 20 either way. Not super fast at all, not slow either, but bear in mind wind speed at those kind of altitudes is going to be a lot more than it is on the ground. So it's definitely not twice the speed of sound as how they were describing it on the History Channel. In all honesty, this is probably a bird. The other thing that's quite weird is where they cut the video, there's probably another 10-20 seconds left before they won't be able to track this, because it's already at 60 degrees. Once it gets past 90, it's not going to be able to see it. As much of the video we've got, there's probably another 10-20 seconds that they cut off, so that's a bit odd. That's it in a nutshell. The full kind of simulation of what I've done here is pretty straightforward. I've put it all in GitHub if you want to take a look at that. There's also just the executable that you can just run this as a standalone thing, just to kind of like see how it works. There's a couple of other little effects I've got in here where you can take the lock off and just kind of see how fast this object would be moving if it wasn't locked. It does whiz past, so it's quite impressive in how they managed to get a lock on this thing. And fair play. I mean, the fact that they're so hyped in the video and amped is probably for that reason. As always, there's more details in my blog write-up. I always put a lot more info in there. 2020's been an interesting year for ufology. I'm expecting next year to be the same, to be honest. Hopefully we get some footage that's a bit more compelling than these ones.